Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. I have the heavy burden / benefit of being the last person presenting, so I'll try to keep it interesting, try to keep it short to get you guys to happy hour sooner, and I will hopefully teach you guys a few things along the way and some of the great things we've learned being here in Australia for 5 years, delivering demand response type services and technology for the market here. So the title of my presentation today is On-Demand Services, Not a New Solution, Just a New Service. It's really going to comprise of two general concepts. Number one is very much the concept of inclusivity in transport and how mobility is actually a key factor, we believe, in delivering the promise of public transport to the masses. The second bit is going to be a recap of some of the lessons that we've learned over the last 5 years working here in New South Wales and across Australia. Of course in Tasmania as well, and other states. And so we as an organization are a 17-year-old demand response technology company, very much started in the US, and as I mentioned before, we're here for 5 years working in Australia. We run the largest demand response project or service in Australia called the CTABS project for Transport for New South Wales. It stands for Centralised Trip and Allocation Booking System. It's about 1,000 vehicles across 92 providers spread across the state of New South Wales. We're also lucky enough to be partners, tech partners in the recent Brisbane DRT Logan trials that are currently out there in effect and learning very much about what's happening there as well. So we've been in this space for quite a bit. I hope that you find this conversation today useful, and if you have any questions afterwards, please let me know. Before we jump too far into the conversation today, I was just kind of wondering, after 2 days of hearing about mobility, how many people still feel like this might be something that's going to be in your portfolio sometime in the next 2 to 3 years? Do you think this is really a fad? I mean, can you give me a show of hands to see how many people think mobility is going to be part of your service offering in the next 2 to 3 years? Okay, so about 50%. It's good to know. I mean, so things have obviously changed in the last year. I remember just at our last conference, it just seemed like a kind of pie-in-the-sky concept, but as you all know from what you've heard in the last 2 days, there's a lot happening in this space, so thank you. That was also me trying to get you to wake up a little bit, so I think it might have not worked too well, so I'll try to keep pushing. So there is, I apologize, let me just go back one there. So Bernie Sanders, obviously a very influential senator in the U.S., really, came up with a key concept here and a kind of key quote, which is really the understanding of how much an impact transport and infrastructure has on local economies, bringing people together, reducing your cost of living, and really just enabling economies to kind of grow and flourish. So his quote here is, for every $1 billion spent on infrastructure, which right now, as you know, Australia has been quite lucrative with investment in infrastructure for transport. I believe last year alone we were close to $30 or $40 billion across Australia, which is pretty substantial, maybe even more. 30,000 jobs are created, thousands are saved each year, and of course greenhouse emissions are cut as well. So, very pivotal to bringing societies together, of course, is these concepts of mobility, transport, and bringing everyone together. Of course, bus is a big component of that. Other transport services such as rail and light rail comprise that as well. It was also Mr. Chuck Norris, funny enough, who was quoted as saying, "The graying of our country continues. Many retirees are now relocating back into dense urban centers for the cultural and social opportunities, access to public transport, and the ability to shop nearby without depending on others." So really just trying to highlight here that there's a moving concept, as we know, of everyone getting back into the cities, metropolitan centers, and then trying to continue living a assisted and facilitated life, all the way through to retirement and beyond. So the concept of mobility and what we've been hearing over the last few days is very much a key part of the growing societies and kind of the growing cities that we've been talking about over the last 2 days. Before we dive too far into what on-demand is versus demand response and mobility as a service, I hope you don't mind if I just quickly define each of those for everybody here, because I've heard those concepts mixed over the last few days. This is very much my personal view. But demand response transport for me is what's been around for quite a while in the United States and here in Australia as well, which is the ability to book a trip sometime in advance. Typically it's anywhere between 8 to 24 hours. Aggregate all of those trips, create a set schedule, and then deploy that schedule or dispatch that schedule on any particular day. The concept of on-demand that we're hearing a lot more about today is really just taking that concept and saying there is no set schedule. You're taking bookings and you are dynamically creating new routes and providing or delivering those services in real time based on the information you're capturing. So it's really mobility on demand. So taking that concept of having to wait 8 to 24 hours for a booking and actually bringing that window down to about 30 minutes or more. The last kind of concept which I've heard floating around the conference quite a bit is mobility as a service, and I have a full slide dedicated to this later, but for me it's mobility on demand is the core function you need to enable people to book a trip and fulfill that trip. Mobility as a service, in my opinion, is more the concept of paying a flat fee every month for transport services, $80 for example, or weekly type payments, and then being able to take each and every mode of transport that you're interested in for that set amount. If you're willing to pay more of a premium, you're given more direct access to private transport or transport network company services, but nonetheless, it will be considered part of an entire kind of transport package for a set monthly fee. So I'll walk you through some more examples of that later on. So mobility for us, for RouteMatch as an organization, is really the promise of getting riders where they want to get, when they want to get there. It's this concept where the last mile or the first mile used to stop at a bus stop. It's the concept of actually extending those services door to door. And there's a lot of benefits that come with that, which some of you've heard over these last few days, and I'll kind of walk through them shortly with you. Mobility is more also about providing a personalized experience, and from booking all the way through to service delivery. So that's everything from remembering your previous trips and your favorites, all the way through to saving your credit card and making it easier for it to interact with public transport services and transport services in general. It's also a stepping stone to further integrate door-to-door public transport experiences. So one thing that's driving a lot of our PTAs to start pushing for on-demand services is their customer experience teams and their data teams are really hungry to understand what happens from door to point of public transport service and then onto the network to complete your trip at the other side. There's always been a black hole, so to speak, of what actually happens from door to the hub. And now with on-demand services, that data is now going to be used to provide better services overall, hopefully provide more lucrative contracts to those providers involved, and also, of course, to increase learnings as to how different groups in society move through the city through any particular day, and obviously optimize services across the network from there. So I mentioned before that mobility as a service is a flavor of, or a more sophisticated flavor of mobility on demand. And so in my humble opinion, true mobility as a service is created at the intersection of regulation and technology. And the reason why I bring up the concept of regulation is much like when you see payment ticketing systems such as Opal happening in New South Wales or the Go Card up north, the concepts there are very much that there needs to be predefined fair establishment concepts, fair collection concepts, and revenue distribution. So in order for MaaS to work properly, in my opinion, we need to start having conversations across industry and with governments to understand what revenue looks like in a world of shared end-to-end kind of mobility trips, all the way through the public transport network, back through mobility and smaller type vehicles delivering those services, and then understanding how revenue will be shared across each of those different services across the way, and ultimately creating new additional revenue sources for providers, and obviously creating new forms of transport for the public. So that's kind of a new concept. I haven't heard that spoken about too much at the conference, so I hope that doesn't rock the boat too much. But if you have any questions on my thoughts on that, please come grab a beer with me at happy hour, and I'm happy to explain that to you a bit further. So in terms of RouteMatch's vision of mobility, one thing that we're trying to push a bit harder on here, and we've heard it in some flavors during the conference, and Paul from Init spoke quite a lot about it in his previous session, which I was pleased to hear, is that mobility isn't just about a new service, which I know is what we're talking about today. It's also about the promise of inclusivity. It's about helping people get from their home back into society, and back into, obviously, in contact with their friends, family, or getting to the mall, or getting to other services they require for medical reasons, et cetera. So for us, mobility is truly a bridge connecting individuals back into society. It's a commitment of equality and a promise to get everyone back into transport, public transport, and getting into where they need to go in a fair and equal way. It's a choice towards social and environmental equality and responsibility. So we all know that there is going to be some learning that happens over the next few years with mobility, obviously getting those vehicles as efficient as possible with as many people on board. When we do get to that point where the optimization engines are powerful enough to be able to do that efficiently and get more people on board, there will be environmental benefits. It will be a more sustainable outcome, we believe, than single occupancy vehicles on the road. And it's also a chance to create new and meaningful connections. So it's really all about, for us, the ability to get people back from home into society in a convenient fashion. And I'd like to play for you a video of
My name is Pepper Harward. I'm
our Vice President
of Transit Solutions at RouteMatch. I guess for me, mobility, it starts with much broader concepts. Our society, not just America, but kind of the developed world, recognizes equality as an essential full human liberty. In that sense, equality is the complement of democracy. And so to me, mobility, a new term, kind of a new path forward. There are new ideas and concepts in transit, but at the same time, we're also at a much better place in terms of equality, accessibility, and those are essential elements of mobility and how I understand it and how I define it being in transit. So you cannot have mobility, it doesn't even exist without those principles of equality and accessibility. Our old mindset has been, we have these different service modes, one that might be accessible, one that might be traditional or conventional. In this new world, mobility itself is just all of those things. You cannot divorce mobility from accessibility. You cannot divorce it from equality. So there's no such thing as taking two paths or having an on-demand service for conventional and an on-demand service for maybe ADA in the States or just persons with disabilities or that have accessibility requirements. It kind of just is that because that's what we've grown into.
So Pepper there, who's our Vice President of Transit Solutions, his vision is very much, using mobility as a form of equality. And so helping people in society get from door to public transport station, educated across, using that public transport network once again and getting back involved in society is truly the promise that public transport authorities have always provided to their constituents, which is helping people get from A to B to be part of society and to keep society moving forward. Some key concepts from there and what we believe is actually shaping mobility technology, and this is why we believe that PTAs and just markets in general are moving towards more of an on-demand principle, is very much around on-demand expectations, and this is all around the consumerization of technology, the concepts around instant gratification. You can download a Netflix movie when you want, you can order pizza when you want, you should be able to order transport when you want as well. And this is truly where the society at large and economies in general are heading towards. And of course, modernization, so that ability to have the technology in your hand to book those trips and to push a service request forward just didn't exist 10 to 15 years ago to this level of sophistication that we have now. The promise of inclusivity, as we mentioned before, so it's building new bridges to society, it's facilitating economies, and it's refranchising those with disabilities who may not have been able to get to and from their required locations in the past. Personalization, which we quickly mentioned earlier as well, is the best fit concept of, are you willing to invest more up front to be able to get a quicker trip, or are you happy to spend a bit more time waiting or booking in advance to get a more affordable trip, but that'll still get you there. So there's concepts around kind of price discrimination and price economies that technology helps you facilitate and obviously work with your customer base on to provide a more personalized service. Also the concept of trip convenience and accessibility. So having an awareness now of understanding where your customer bases are, what accessibility needs they have, their closest public transport hub, and being able to match their accessibility need to that transport hub. We now have that level of personalization that we just haven't had to this level of detail for quite a long time before. And of course, concepts of history, favorites, and understanding the behaviors of those users that are using your systems and using your on-demand transport services. In terms of transformation, so building communities once again, getting people from home into society, smoother multimodal trips, so the ability to work with GTFS data that comes from, for example, a New South Wales open data platform, be able to understand where your vehicles are coming, or your train kind of services or your bus services in real time, and being able to match your trips to those bus services is going to be something that we feel is quite important from a public transport service going forward as well. And booking spontaneity, so just that ability to get where you want to go. And ultimately, these platforms, the more effective ones we believe over the next few years, are going to work on heavy aggregation with transport network companies and other transport service providers, pulling that all together, working on predictive supply and demand based on everything from inclement weather through to events, working on, of course, cost savings and understanding how each of those modes cost, or each of those service kind of towers cost, and then being able to provide a best cost or least cost service to your riders, and then ultimately orchestration of services as well. So understanding what is happening from a macro environmental factor level of each city, and then being able to orchestrate and understand where your vehicles are at any point in time, and standing up services or standing down services based on capacity. So well, I'm hoping that through conversations you've heard over the last 2 days, you start seeing mobility as effectively not a new solution, as we mentioned before, just a new service. It's a new tool in your toolkit. It helps you get from what used to only be main roads and your ability to kind of service those main roads through to back neighborhoods, and understanding, of course, that you can actually deliver services all the way through to the last mile now, and get closer to your customer. So Melissa, who is our marketing director, has a few words here regarding opportunity around mobility.
I'm Melissa Vidakovich, Director of Marketing at RouteMatch. To me, mobility is everything. It's providing individuals, regardless of his or her background, the opportunity to participate in all aspects of life. And whether that's getting to a job and providing for your family, or earning a degree, or even just visiting friends and having a social life, it's that ability to have that freedom and spontaneity and really live life to the fullest. Mobility is a hot topic right now, but mobility is more than just the movement of people. It's really a movement within itself. And just as public transit promises to remove barriers, agencies are doing the same thing. They're taking a look at what worked 20 years ago might not really work today. And so they're evaluating new innovations in technology, and that's opening the door to a whole new world of possibilities. But what it really comes back to is asking that question, is public transit fulfilling its promise to provide service equity? So agencies are exploring things such as, private-public partnerships, or simply removing labels from their vehicles, such as taking a paratransit vehicle and maybe offering that as an on-demand service to pick up riders in a low-density area. What makes this so exciting is it's a time for great opportunity, and it's a time for progress.
Great, so hopefully that provides a more or a different perspective on mobility. We do know that there's a lot of mobility work coming down the pipeline. Obviously, interest is growing in the market. As we talk about, best fit contract models, obviously best delivery practices around on-demand, and as everyone kind of learns those concepts, we should also keep in mind and kind of keep front and center in our business cases and in our conversations with our PTAs and our customers that this is also about extending that public transport network all the way through, the back streets of cities and into people's homes as well. So next up, what I was hoping to share with you all, and it's a bit of, I guess, a shift in what we were just discussing now, is sharing with you some of the lessons we've learned across mobility projects, both in Canada, the US, but also here in Australia. We've been lucky enough to partner up with Keolis Downer on quite a few projects happening for mobility on demand for the New South Wales trials, and we're also doing some work with a community transport provider up in Woy Woy in the Central Coast, putting all of these pilots together. First one launches on November 27th, which is for Northern Beaches, and we continue on from there all the way through to the end of January with the different mobility pilots. So some of the key concepts that we've picked up along the way, and some of the key learnings we've picked up, is there seems to be 2 to 3 models that continue to come up from a service delivery perspective for on-demand. And the first one that I'd like to share with you, and this is really just to kind of plant some seeds and to help you think about how on-demand may fit into your service portfolios, is what we call attractor destinations. So it's this concept where each suburb has key destinations where constituents regularly travel to. That could be a mall, that could be a medical center, it could be a stadium for big events. On-demand attractors make it easier for locals to visit their mall, see their doctor, without using their private vehicles. So the concept is, and we've heard 2 sides of this story over the last few days, but the concept there is very much around if you do have an ability to get from home to that destination, you may not need to take your personal vehicle as a single occupant and park there, and of course go through all the joys of trying to find parking and to getting to that service or getting to that location on time. It also allows locals who don't have a vehicle, as we've discussed before, who cannot drive themselves, to become a regular part of the network once again. Each attractor has its own set of characteristics, including drop-off and pick-up locations and times. So one of the key things to keep an eye on as you think about planning these type of services is to understand, particularly for large areas, where you're going to set down your services, and understanding what kind of time characteristics you get around traffic, pick up and drop off of students, for example, all the way through to events at those particular areas. The key to success is convenience. So it's all about helping your customers see the convenience of using that trip and getting to that desired location at the time they would like. And passengers from there typically will go either to their next destination or home again, which is very much what we've been seeing as well for with the Brisbane DRT trials. So for the Brisbane DRT trials, we've separated Logan up into 4 different service areas. That particular service goes from home to a tractor. In this, it could be a park and ride, it could be a train station, it could be a mall, like the Hyperdome, for example. And there was a lot of planning around time of day, understanding behaviors around those malls when people use those particular services or those particular locations, and of course understanding where you set off and drop off and pick up customers as to not create more traffic. Second model that we see quite a bit out in the on-demand trials that we've seen so far is very much around trunk feeder services. So it's the concept of bringing people from home to a public transport point. This is probably the most exciting and the most particular kind of on-demand trials that we see time and time again with PTAs. And the concepts there are very much around getting people to and from rail stations or bus stops. So getting them away from their personal vehicles or having to walk long distances, and getting them into the public transport kind of hub or exchanges. The ability to provide a bus service in residential areas is typically quite limited by infrastructure and cost, but clearly smaller vehicles are better positioned and well positioned to get into those smaller areas. Door-to-door services also provide convenience and increased productivity of those particular trips and for those on board. Increasing patronage on existing mass transit assets is in principle should reduce congestion in certain areas, and that's what we're looking to do through some of our existing trials that we've partnered with Keolis on. And ultimately, PTAs will also receive new customer information on first and last mile journeys. As I mentioned earlier, what we're seeing time and time again is PTAs are willing to invest in on-demand services even though they're quite new and quite novel, because they're very keen to see the data that comes out of people's trips from home to that public transport hub. We've done a lot of work as well with a group over in Canada called York Region Transit, and so they were actually our first customer that helped us think on demand 2 years ago. They've been on this journey with us for quite a while, both working with demand responsive transport, so that is where you book in advance and have a relatively set schedule, but pushing as well all the way through to on demand. So they have a dedicated fleet of vehicles that service their customers within a half an hour to an hour window of when they need that trip booking. They do charge a bit more of a premium for that particular service, but the customer can elect in whether they choose distance or convenience or cost, so to speak, for that particular service. And they've actually been kind enough to put together a video for us on what inspired them to get into this on-demand concept.
I'm Sharon Doyle, Manager of Mobility Plus at York Region Transit. Mobility is about the ease of movement. It's the ability to move freely from one place to the other using car share, bike share, maybe even transit. It's using a number of choices to get from one place to the other. And here at York Region Transit, it's simply to get you wherever you need to go. It was the story of 2 young men we heard about who had secured a job in the region, in an industrial area. They were living in a group home in the north of the region. And once a month, they were on shift work from 4 to midnight. And they could not get back to the group home because transit had stopped running for the day. So they would sit in a coffee shop until first thing in the morning and then take the first bus north. So we knew we could do better than that. We had vehicles out there. The paratransit service had vehicles out there. So we started the on-demand service, picked them up and took them home. And it worked out so well that we took the branding off our Mobility Plus vehicles, and now they're all just branded with YRT Viva logo. So York Region Transit has been in existence since 2001, and we're relatively new at this. But what we learned from the very beginning was that we could not paint every rider with the same brush. Everyone has a different transportation need, and that need may change from day to day. So we have to give people options. We used to focus on getting people out of their cars. Many people don't have cars, or they don't want a car. Other people live in rural areas, not because they want to, but because they have no other choice. So all of these people deserve the access to public transit, and it is our responsibility to get people to fixed routes and our paratransit passengers to get same-day service. The next step for us is a one-app solution that will allow our paratransit passengers to be able to book, confirm, cancel trips, our on-demand passengers to be able to book and receive a trip within a specific time, and our fixed route passengers to be able to trip plan. There may be opportunities to add bike share, car share, or transportation network companies in the future. The sky's the limit, and we're just excited to be along for the ride. We get a large number of calls from across North America wanting to know how we are doing this and wanting to know how we started to do it. And we're not in competition with them, so we're happy to share any information we have. And we all want to provide our passengers with the spontaneity and inclusivity and the independence.
So that was just another general story of how a customer-led approach to delivering an on-demand service started by reviewing some existing trips they had from certain customers, creating focus groups, understanding their behaviors, and then designing an on-demand service around those particular needs. From there, obviously, the service has grown substantially, and they've been operating that on-demand service now for about a year. There's quite a few good lessons learned from that particular project, and I'm happy to share them with you as well over a beer later on. In terms of our Greater Sydney Mobility on Demand projects, so we're working on 3 Mobility on Demand projects, the Northern Beaches, Macquarie Park, and also Central Coast. Each of those projects is similar but slightly different, and so the Northern Beaches project is connecting those from home to the bus rapid transit line that's just recently been completed or soon to be completed for the Northern Beaches of Sydney with 10-minute headways connecting into the CBD. The idea there is very much trunk feeder, so getting people from home to that trunk line of the BRT line and back into the city and then back home again afterwards. Macquarie Park is looking to basically work with a business park to pick people up from home within a 15-kilometer radius and taking them to site of work as an attractor model. And that one is kicking off in January. And the Central Coast project is called Coast Connect, and that is looking to connect people from the Woy Woy Peninsula in the Central Coast back into the Woy Woy station. In a coordinated timetable manner with the rail timetable. So even during peak hours there, or peak rail connectivity times, you're still looking at about 27-minute headways from train to train. So it's pretty important that they get to the station on time and have enough time to get from platform to that rail service, depending on their accessibility requirements, have enough time to get to that train service with no issues. Some of the key lessons and just concepts that I wanted to share with you all regarding all of these projects that we've seen so far. As mentioned before, there's many kind of trunk feeder and attractor models we're seeing out there. It seems to be the mode of on-demand transport for the time being, which makes sense. People need to go to particular places, whether it is to get to work through public transport or to get their shopping done, and that seems to happen time and time again through these trials that we're seeing. The aim is to get personal vehicles off the road and back onto public transport, and we see that time and time again from PTAs as well. Our first trials is with Keolis Downer starting in the Northern Beaches for November 2017, and we've been working quite diligently to get that moving. Early surveys of service areas have been quite positive, and the public is very much hungry for on-demand services. It's a very affordable way for them to get from home to the bus stop, continue on their journey from there. And they are willing to pay, from what we've seen so far, a premium to complete that part of the journey before they hit the Opal network, for example, in New South Wales, and complete with their electronic payment system. And pilot contracts so far, just for knowledge, they've been quite challenging because as it is a brand new and kind of innovative concept, what we thought on-demand was going to be 6 to 8 months ago when those contracts were signed, as we continue to learn, refine, et cetera, budgets are set, scope is set. And so you have to continue working from within those boundaries, and there have been some challenges there. You want to explore more, but of course you have to respect the commercial boundaries. And know your demand plans. So as another key takeout is understand the areas you choose to operate on-demand services in. Understand your density, your typical trip time, your distance time. Secure your fleets and drivers early. Plan your associations to those zones based on density and travel patterns as early as you can. Get to know your customers intimately when you jump into that space, because the planning is a key component of having a successful day one operation. So in closing, just going back to the general concepts we spoke about earlier, mobility just becomes just another service in your portfolio. It's genuinely not a new solution, it's just a new service. It complements your existing fleets and gets your customers to places currently not possible in existing PT services. So in principle, it should expand your businesses and give you new revenue opportunities. The services that you provide are smaller, so more detailed planning is required. You're going to deal with dead ends you didn't know were there, one-way streets you hadn't had to deal with before. So get some local knowledge in those areas you're going to be operating in, drive your vehicles around, and get people to learn those streets quite intimately. It'll help you run an efficient service. Other concepts to consider that we saw today in the presentation is make sure you understand who your core customers are and who you're appealing to. So create personas around each of those customers and who you're actually trying to market to and engage. Start engaging with your driver unions early and understand what their needs are to run those on-demand services. As I mentioned before, smaller vehicles do require new local knowledge, so spend time to understand those local areas and push forward. Work early and think of success metrics and reporting requirements because it is a brand new service. There are things you can measure, but there are some things that are harder to. So customer surveys are quite important, and qualitative understanding of those services is very key to success. Think of new ways to charge for your service, whether it's per kilometer type run or it's incentive based on the number of people you have in that vehicle. Challenge yourself with new ways to consider how to run those particular services and bill for it. Design the experience from start to finish, so think about that experience from end to end, and don't be afraid to fail. It is a brand new concept, and with great risk comes great reward. So get out there and fail quickly, as they say, and learn as much as you can to build a better service and engage the public. Sorry, guys. Just realized I didn't have those slides up. I apologize. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Juan, for that presentation. I'd just like to thank all our speakers and sponsors for this afternoon. Tonight's dinner is at the Scania Dinner, and it's a short walk to PW1 over near one of the Big Finger wharfs. It's near where the Mona ferry departs, so there'll be people there to guide you. I'm advised from Michael that there'll be some old Tasmanian colonial style people dressed up. I'm not sure whether that's Jeff and Bubbles, but we'll find out. But anyway, look forward to tonight. So if you can be down at the foyer at 6:30 p.m, there'll be shuttle buses to take you there if you don't wish to walk, but it's about a 10-minute stroll. So we're off to the happy hour now, sponsored by Valvoline in the foyer. Just make sure you put your business cards in the Valvoline barrel to win the chance to have an Australian Formula Grand Prix experience. So thank you.